So I'll share this session with you after today's session so that you've got, if you want to look back on it, if you want to share it with anybody in your network, feel free to do that. And the whole theme of today's session is about development and how we can develop, yourself as leaders in your business and your teams, because that's what kind of drives the right growth and mindset and really helping people to thrive as you go into a new year. And as always, whenever we're on these workshops, the design of these workshops is to create some thinking space, give you an opportunity to kind of slow things down, step off the treadmill and really start to think about what you're doing and what you're working on with your teams and your businesses. So hopefully some useful thinking space today and some ideas. So I'll try and cover some principles that perhaps aren't as obvious as maybe when we start to think about development. I'll try and cover some things today that aren't perhaps what you'd normally expect. So we'll look at, I'll share some data with you around what percentage of people focus on growth and development, because that always intrigues me. We'll talk about kind of self-coaching. We'll talk about development planning and how to integrate professional development into your work and career. So I'll probably go through maybe 20, 25 minutes of content, and then we'll open it up and just have a discussion and take some ideas and share what you're thinking of in terms of 2025. And if this has been useful, perhaps some of the changes that you might want to make as you go into next year. So I use these different tools in my business, and I'll share one of them with you at the end of today's session called scorecards. And effectively, I use them as part of client programs. So when we start a program, we invite people to kind of go through an assessment process, which is like a scorecard. And there's a number of different elements to that scorecard, but there's a couple of questions that it poses to people, or statements that it poses to people, that really interest me. So the first is that people are answering, I haven't been prioritizing my own professional development. Something always gets in the way. And if you look at the answers to that, 65% of people either strongly agree or agree. And then you've got another 16%, that neither agree nor disagree. So if they don't agree or disagree, effectively they're agreeing, I haven't been prioritizing my development. So you're up at 81%. So 81% of people don't prioritize professional development. And I think we can all relate to that when we're busy, that actually it's the thing that tends to get bumped down the road. It's the thing that is easiest really for people to delay or put off. And then the other one I really like to ask people, just to kind of start to think about goal setting and what are people trying to achieve, is the statement, I have a vision for myself in the future as a world-class sales or business professional. Because if we don't start to set a shift in identity or a shift in our thinking around what we want to achieve in the future, then actually we tend to stay the same. And so 62% of people either agree or strongly agree with that, so that's good. But it does mean 38% of people aren't thinking about, I want to be as good as I can be, or I want to achieve a level that it could be considered world class. And I've always found, if you're in leadership, I've always found that's a really useful development question to people, because often you'll be in teams where someone says, well, I'm happy doing my job, I'm happy doing what I do, and that's good, because we all need people that contribute and work in roles for long term. But actually asking people that question then, well, in terms of development, what does world-class look like if you were to stay in your role? Because that really starts to create that separation between perhaps what their current performance is versus what it could be if they really started to think about growth and development. So I share those with you as a starting point, because it's quite interesting in terms of the data. And then when I think about development, I think about it as a part of, in leadership anyway, as part of a cycle. And I see, as leaders, there's like a playbook that I tend to run. So having a business plan, making sure that you have relationships with your teams that fosters trust, and really starts to help them to lean into being able to be challenged and supported at the same time. So really think about where trust fits with that. Then thinking about having agreement around a contract with people. So have you got standards in place? Are people signed up to that and committed to those standards? And are you able to then lead and manage people to those standards? Then starting to think about objectives and goals, having clarity over what's expected in a role. And lots of businesses have job descriptions, but they don't always go that next step and say, let's talk clearly about expectations, performance expectations, KPIs. Then as a manager, having space to be able to work with your teams, watch them in action, do some observation, and from that position, you know, I'm sure you all heard the term the Johari window, where you start to see things that other people aren't aware of. It's not visible to them, and you're able to do that through that observation process. And by doing that, it enables coaching. So that's how we can coach much more effectively. And then the final stage of this model that we work through is that we call it heroes in the making, and it really is about development planning and helping people to thrive and grow as part of their role. So not think about it as something separate. And I was with a client this week. It was really interesting that I've come to the end of a 12-month program with a client, and they said it's really interesting that their teams, a lot of their teams, as they start to have development discussions, were saying, is this something else we've now got to do? And it was really fascinating because we talked about how to handle that conversation, because it shouldn't be something else that someone's got to do. It should be integrated into the work. It's part of the responsibility. And it's interesting to hear different people's perceptions of development and growth. So today we'll talk a bit about that as well. So heroes in the making. And I like to really think about that idea that everybody has this additional potential. They're able to unlock the next level of performance, but they can only do that if they recognize that there is a next level of performance to get to. So setting goals around development and thinking about what future do your teams want for themselves is a big part of how to trigger and kickstart that development cycle and the conversations. And of course, when we start to go in search of, better performance, goals, whether they're personal goals, professional goals, business goals, life goals, it's really interesting that we kind of set a goal and think, okay, it's quite straightforward, I'll set some actions. And then every time we go on this kind of journey towards a goal, stuff gets in the way. It's always going to be trickier than we think. And, especially if we're setting quite ambitious goals for our teams. I remember early conversations about different roles in businesses that I might have, and it almost seems a little bit out of reach for at different times in your life. But actually, if you recognize what it is you're trying to achieve, it's really important to stay focused on that goal, because that's what keeps you motivated and on track as you hit all of these different barriers and challenges that inevitably get in the way. And of course, the goal is the thing that inspires people to get past the setbacks, the distractions. And we have to make sure that actually, as leaders, sometimes it's just about helping people to refocus on what is it we're trying to achieve in terms of that development goals. And I've shared this before in sessions, but it's always a good reminder that the reason goal setting works is because as soon as you set a goal, and we're doing it today in the context of development, that something happens in your mind, you trigger what they call the reticular activating system. And what that means is that as soon as you've decided you want to achieve something or you want to gain something, the mind starts to look for different opportunities to support you in making that progress or achieving that goal. But it's the setting of the goal that triggers the RAS. And it happens, RAS shows up in so many different elements of life. I've said this before, if you're buying a new car, or if you're starting to look at new cars, you'll notice they start to pop up everywhere. If you want a new piece of technology, you notice it everywhere. Sometimes that might be Siri listening and sending you ads. But for the most part, it is about your mind tuning into what it is you want. So we can really trigger this through that process of setting goals. And then I learned about this when I kind of probably a couple of leadership roles in, someone talked to me, it was an HR director, talked to me about the Pygmalion effect. And I was kind of a bit surprised I'd not heard about it, but I did a bit of research, and I very often talk about it because it's quite interesting. I've experienced this on both sides of the equation. So as a leader with my teams and having development conversations about, what I believe their capabilities are, and getting them to stretch their own thinking about what they're capable of. And what the Pygmalion effect says is that our actions towards others, so our actions towards our teams, for example, will start to change their beliefs. Okay, so they start to change their beliefs about what we think they're capable of. And then, of course, that changes their actions. So their actions towards us change. If we say, I believe you're capable of more, we start to delegate, we start to give them increased responsibility, we start to coach and help them improve, then they'll start to act in accordance with that belief. And then, of course, that changes the beliefs they have about themselves, and which of course changes the way we act towards them. And then it becomes like the self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes a cycle of improvement and growth. And I think back, as I say, both sides of the equation on this. When I first started in sales at very large corporate, and I'd been in a couple of sales roles before, went into 3M, and within probably a year, 18 months, I had a conversation with someone who said, you could be managing larger accounts, or you could be leading a sales team, and I remember having those early conversations and feeling quite excited about it, and never really having had that perception for myself. And within 2 years, I'd had a development plan, was in a much larger role, and started to manage complex accounts. Then 2 years after that, I became a sales manager. I had another conversation where someone said, have you thought about general management, business management? Within 5 years, I was a general manager, and then had this succession of different roles. And none of those roles probably would have occurred to me, or I wouldn't have thought they were possible for me without that guidance and that leadership, investment, and belief in my skills and capability. So, and then when I was in leadership positions, I would have those same conversations with key members of my team, especially those that were really ambitious and wanted to thrive and grow. And it just goes to show that we sometimes perhaps we don't realize just how significant as leaders our role is in inspiring that level of growth and development in our teams. And I use a couple of documents which I'll share with you, because hopefully these are useful for you. Again, these were born out of conversations I'd had with mentors. This was that same HR director actually that I had this conversation with, where when she was mentoring me, she asked me about my development planning and what I'd put in place. And I'll be honest, I didn't have anything, and I had to kind of confess to her that everything I'd done to that point in time had been a bit hit and miss. And so she and I sat down and developed a couple of plans. So this was the first one, and we called it like a strategic career plan. So it kind of went through, this was relative to what we were doing, but what was my current profile, the service, the current position, job grade, that was an internal thing. Mobility, they were quite keen on understanding, do you want to stay local? Would you be prepared to go across the European continent? Would you be prepared to go to the US, for example? I had a number of those conversations in the past. And then started to map out what's important to me, what's important in my career, what's important to me personally, in my life more generally, what are the skills that I have right now, what experience have I got, and what does my current job need of me? And then, of course, started to talk about career interests. What did I think the next job could be? What would the midterm be? And what about long term? And then here in the development planning, I started to think about this 70-20-10 principle, where 10% of what we learn and develop is through formal courses we might go on, or formal education. 70% actually is what we learn and apply in the role. So almost using the job as development. That's really useful for those discussions where people say, is this something else I've got to do? And then 20% is things I do, or things we do, through networks, mentoring, relationships, things that you're doing that are intentional about development, but they're not necessarily a course that you go on. And then last few things on this plan, things that you dislike, so you can be clear on what don't I want to do. And then the USPs. We often think about USPs for our business, for products that we're working on. We don't often think about it for ourselves. So thinking about how to develop that as almost a strategic career map for where we want our careers to go. And I've found that really useful. And then, of course, action planning in the bottom. So this was the plan. There's a template here you can see, and there's an example of some input in there as well. I'm happy to share these with you after today's session if you think they're useful tools that you might want to share or adopt. And then the second element to this career development planning was actually what we then mapped out was a shorter term development action plan. So I would look at that career plan probably once a year and update it. But then on a regular basis, and this was quarterly, was the cycle that I used to work on, I would have a development action planning conversation. This is a bit more tactical. So you'll see it talks about specific development areas, talks about the goal, the desired outcome for that development area, the timescale on which I'm going to work on it, and then key actions that sit behind that goal or development area. And it's a really useful way to just track and map what it is you're working on short term. And I can measure a total difference in my career between the time before I had these kind of tools and this level of focus on it versus the times when I then put these plans into place. And the transition and transformation was quite remarkable simply because I had a plan. It's a bit like anything in your life, isn't it? If you get more intentional about it and you really start to make a commitment to planning something, you actually then make significant progress. It's sometimes those simple actions that really do make the progress. So I love this quote by Jim Rohn. I don't know if you've any of you are aware of Jim Rohn, but he was a success coach in the US. He's sadly passed away, but you can still find a lot of his materials. But he has some really interesting quotes. This one I really love. The ultimate reason for setting goals, especially development goals, is to entice you to become the person it takes to achieve them. So think about the goal almost as being the driver for your improvement and development. And then final thing I want to share with you is this simple self-coaching model that I have learned and have developed and still use to this day. So I tend to do this on a Friday afternoon. It's the last thing I do before I segue between my working week and the weekend. So I do this at kind of 4:30, 5 o'clock on a Friday. And I just asked myself these 3 key questions from the Win, Learn, Change model. So I will say, what went well this week? I just reflect on the kind of highlights, the things that were really positive in the week. I'll then ask myself, what did I learn this week? Which kind of gets me, so the what went well is intentional because it's a positive thing. It kind of stimulates a bit of positive chemicals. You've got some of that serotonin released. And then I'm prepared, and it's good for coaching as well. Then you're much more likely to be able to say, okay, what did I learn? You're much more open to that question. And then finally, what will I commit to change? So what do I need to change going forward? And I'll do this on a Friday afternoon. And there's always 1 or 2 things that I look back through my diary. I'm looking at key meetings. I'm like, yes, that went well. And then I think, yeah, that one wasn't. I learned quite a bit in that conversation. And there's always a couple of tweaks that I can make and take forward as I go into the next week. And I do this in a OneNote file, so it's all electronic, but I check in on the previous week, then look at this week, I'll ask and answer those questions. And it just kind of sets me up, and I'll put some diary reminders in for the next week. So it just kind of keeps me continually thinking and developing my skills and capability. I've been doing that for quite a while now. And I love this final quote from Bill Gates around feedback. We all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve. And if it's good enough for Bill Gates, it's definitely good enough for me. And I really like the idea of creating, in leadership positions, creating this culture of feedback, so people feel confident to receive it. They feel confident to give feedback. And if you look at some of those organizations where feedback is embedded in the culture, they tend to grow faster and have more positive cultures around being able to have direct conversations, make progress, and hopefully put growth on the agenda for people in the business. Okay, so I'm just going to pause there because I've been I said I'll do about 20 minutes in, and just kind of give you an opportunity to start to think about some of the topics that we've talked about there. So there's quite a bit in there, but it's all about development, growth, and thinking about how that inspires our teams and hopefully yourselves as you go into 2025. So I'll just pause the sharing and just invite a bit of feedback and maybe some comments from people who'd like to share perhaps some thinking based on what we've covered so far.
Yeah, I think I've taken away from that putting a consistent structure in place across all in the team. So although we have development plans, I always allow the individuals to write the development plans themselves. What do you want to work on? Where's your strengths, weaknesses? How can I help? And all that good stuff. But it does mean that you're reviewing different plans in different ways and the way they're written up. So I think the simplicity of having a standard format, a template to it would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I'll share these 2 in the follow-up email, Chris. So you've got one or the other to look at, and you can then adjust it or amend it if it's not quite what you and your team are looking for.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I must admit, it's been in teams that I've led. Once you get that consistency in place, you're more familiar with it as a leader of the team. they can then share their plans with each other and start to pick out different areas and elements, because there's very often some common development goals for teams, especially if you're in like functional teams like sales or marketing. So yeah, no, it's good. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, glad that's useful. Good. Who else would like to share some thinking on this topic?
I will if it's my turn next, by the looks of it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
I waited. Well, I think it all was relevant and a prompt, and in one or two cases a reminder. And I love a checklist. I love a flow, and so it's on my page, so to speak. It would be in terms of it would be for my self-coaching, really.
Yeah.
Because at the moment I don't have a team. I have had teams in the past, and it just struck me as you were talking that when I had a team, I didn't know a 50th of this stuff. It's ironic that I've learned about it after I became a non-team, non-leader, which is bizarre. It's why maybe other careers go that way as well. But anyway, when I was a leader, I didn't know anything about it really. So there we go. But no, so it's a lot of those like the end of week checklists, and just like used to call it, I read it similar to what somebody called the cappuccino test. You go to a cafe, get a cappuccino, and you sit down for half an hour and you go through those 3 questions in your case, or whatever the questions are: stop, start, continue, that sort of thing. And I just need to get back to that framework because I need to self-coach. I forgot to do it.
Yeah, well, it's easily done when you're busy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, for all the reasons you said, it just slips down the order and that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm probably not bad, but need to formalize it a little bit more.
Yeah, that way you can build momentum on it, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you drift. So that's the danger in terms of self-development, and still want to do a lot of self-developing. So I get back on it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. I'm glad it's a good reminder for you. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sure you're the same as me, but I can trace back the times in my career when my performance was, stronger, and I link that to times when I was prioritizing development and growth. Those times when I got really busy and I sacrificed it were times when I felt like I just kind of drifted a bit or stagnated. And actually, even now in my own business, I've been doing this 7 years. I will intentionally spend that development time, because any times where I get a lot of client work in and I kind of put it on the back burner, I notice that I tend to go off the boil. It's really strange. So actually, the thing that reignites my interest and passion in my business is getting back to my own development. So it really is. I heard this quote from this guy called Vishen Lakhani, who has a podcast called the Mind Valley podcast, and he talks about using your business or your career or your role as the vehicle for your professional development. I think that's such a good way of looking at it, that the work we do actually is what helps us to develop and grow. Yeah.
No, 100%. 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. Great. Who else would like to share some feedback with us?
I quite like the I'm new to all this, so sort of bear with me.
That's okay, Cheryl.
I've just sort of taken a team on, really, and I like the feedback side of what you said. It is good to give feedback, whether it be good or bad. But I think also you forget sometimes to give the good feedback. Do you know? Or people don't necessarily do that all the time. Sometimes it is a little bit negative, or you haven't done this, you haven't done that, you know what I mean? But it is good to give the feedback and for people to, take that on board as well. So that's quite good. I'll be looking at that, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Cheryl. You're absolutely right. And I think it probably in a lot of businesses, it's a tendency, and it's a natural default tendency to pick up on the things that need to improve.
Yeah.
And that's good, because you want that continual improvement, but it should be accompanied, as you quite rightly say, with recognizing the good work that people do, the great contribution, the progress, and the improvements, because if you don't do that, it can just feel like, and I've been on the receiving end of this a few times, and I've
Yeah.
probably done it to teams without realizing a few times, where it just feels like, God, no matter what I do, there's always something else that needs to be changed
Yeah.
or improved, and that can start to wear people down. So
Yeah.
really important distinction there.
That's how we as a team are, and myself are feeling at the moment. So it's I'll go back to work next week and I will be sort of given the feedback of you've done really well on this, and do you know what I mean, to try and boost that up. And it was quite good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, pleasure. It's sometimes the simple reminders of things that we kind of know but just either forget or overlook, don't we?
Yeah.
Good. And I really like the kind of cadence around development, because the other thing that's really common is that at kind of end of year you do an appraisal, and you talk about the previous year, and hopefully that's positive for a lot of people. And then you go into January and you start to talk about development for the year, and people might pull together like the bones of a plan.
Yeah.
And then the next time they talk about it is in the appraisal in December. and that's so common. That start of my career, probably first 4 or 5 years, that's how I was managed. But it wasn't until I got into this cycle of actually, when I became a manager and started to work with the team, I had some really good mentors, and we got into a really good rhythm of monthly reviews, which were performance-based reviews, simple, some little bit longer at the start, but once you get into the habit of it, half an hour a month. So really powerful performance reviews. And then every quarter, expanding that review so that it included a development discussion and revisiting the plan and talking about what's progressed and what are they looking to do next and where are the gaps. And a lot of the time people would say, I've been meaning to do more on it. So then you could coach them on, okay, so how are you going to create capacity to do that? And which elements of your role do you think you could integrate into development? Because people don't always think about that, but just the conversations can prompt your teams to start to think, actually this can be part of my role. It doesn't have to be separate from it. And when people get to that point, it's really powerful, because they then start to really develop and grow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Good. Excellent. I'm glad that was useful for you. Any more? Ikra is on with us. Tanisha's on with us. Dorcas is on with us. Anything from the three of you? Would you like to share some ideas?
Well, finding that unmute buttons there, Justin. I think just picking up on Jonathan's point there. Life is going to get in the way. Things are going to happen, and that's fine, and we've got to accept that. But I think having the cadence and having the structure and the framework allows you to get back on track much quicker than allowing it to drift. But we've got to recognise, I didn't have that cappuccino moment this week because of X, Y, and Z. Perfectly legitimate, but I need to have it next week to get myself back on track and try and maintain it.
Yeah. Can I add something as well there, Justin? That I've spent most of my career not in companies that didn't have a coaching culture, either because it was the era or the company were medium sized, where generalization here, probably tends not to have as much of a coaching culture as the large corporates. And that's whether it was a culture that integrated all levels, or you had coaching sessions, coach me for an hour or something. There was none of that until the last few years, really. So we in my previous company, and even with the current business associate, we do go in and train companies, and a lot of them have still not got anything like a coaching culture. And the people that are there are not going to take it on board very easily either, because they're from the old school sort of thing. And so the challenge has been to encourage a coaching culture, and even to install a coaching culture at places that are just, talk about changing the tank around. It's and you can't change everyone. They are the raw materials. So that's just an observation, really, that I throw in. I mean, it's got to happen. It's got to happen because of the world we are now in. So just an observation, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you it is difficult to change an entire culture in an organisation. I remember being part of a leadership team when I was at 3M, and we had a new managing director come over and he came from Canada actually, and he introduced some really big strategic changes to the UK organisation, and as part of his process, he took us through a 7-stage change management process. And it was, do you know, have you heard of John Cotter's seven steps of change?
I don't think I have, if I'm brutally honest. No.
No, yeah, I hadn't until he introduced us to it. But it was really interesting. There's a book by John Cotter. There's a few books by John Cotter, John P. Cotter. And one of the books is called My Iceberg is Melting. And basically it's a tale about change that you can relate to organizational change. And basically, you know, the metaphor is you've got all these penguins on this iceberg and it's melting, and they go, no, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. We don't need to go anywhere yet. And it's about how you get people to see the need to change. And that's a great example where people aren't in a coaching culture, don't see the need for a coaching culture, think that what they're doing is good enough. And actually, the job then is through the steps of change to help them to see why it's urgent and why they need to change now. And sometimes that's difficult, but it's helping people to face the realities and the risks of not changing, because people think inaction has no consequence, but of course it does. And actually, what are the costs of inaction, and how do you start to help people see that for themselves, so they say, actually, this is something we have to drive as an internal change. And I would say that first step of that 7 change model is, he calls it identify the burning platform. So what is the argument that helps people to realize if they don't change that the platform's burning, and that the business won't exist if they don't make a change. So it's quite an interesting model. I won't go through it, but it's definitely worth looking at if that's something you come across a lot, Jonathan. That 7-step Cotter model to change is really, once you start to recognize the different stages, it's really effective in terms of how do you kickstart change in the first place, how do you then get support for a change, how do you communicate change, how do you follow that up, how do you sustain and embed it. It's a really useful model, very well proven.
Yeah, it varies in industries,
and
it varies in size, but so it's hit and miss really at the moment.
And you know, ultimately, I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because coaching is probably the way to get that in. The way to change that to a coaching culture is to coach people in how to do it and why it's important
From the top.
And it has to be from the top. Yeah,
you can't go in at the middle.
No,
not in my experience. Don't know about the others, but
no, I'm the same. And very often, if I'm in those similar conversations around, you know, cultural changes, if I know that if the senior leader isn't on board, then it just fizzles out, or it just doesn't get the traction that it needs. Yeah.
But as a leader, though, it's incumbent upon you to deliver professional development in the correct coaching way. So I think you can separate culture. You're not going to change a culture. Forget about that. Park that one. But as a leader of people, you should be coaching your people to be the best version of themselves possible. That's part of the job. You know, it's in the role description. It doesn't matter that maybe the organization doesn't have that coaching culture. As a leader, you should have that within yourself, surely.
It's a good point, Chris. And certain clients I'm thinking of, there's nothing stopping an individual leader being a coaching, collaborative style leader. And even if the company, even if he'll then go to a group leaders meeting and 80% of the other leaders are just not on that style. Is that what you're saying? I've seen that. This particular client I'm thinking of, some of them are more affable towards the coaching culture, and that's their natural style to get the best out of their team. But further down the corridor or to another branch, it is a few miles away, it is like 20 different cultures almost of a varying grade, partly geographical because they're not in the same building, and partly because they've got people who are younger people and older people. I shouldn't have said that, but it tends to be a slight generalization there, that have been in the industry a long time, which I said was a sort of a you could say an old school management style industry, if you like. And so yeah, if there's nothing stopping an individual leader. Do you agree with that? Is that what you're getting at? You know, irrespective of, despite the company culture, you can still manage and lead in a coaching style, even if you've not got the formal framework down from HR or L&D to implement that, and the checklist and everything. You can be that leader anyway.
Yeah, it is a leadership style. You're bob on there. That's the style that you adopt, but you have to be mindful that you have to have coachees who wish to be coached. You can't crack every nut with the same hammer. Some people just don't want to be coached. Have management conversations. That's what they like. But those who are the sponges, who want to be coached and want to develop and take responsibility, because that's what coaching is about. It's not about you. It's about them. They've got to take the responsibility to develop and bring their skill set to the fore. But yeah, so yeah, that was the point. It's a leadership style.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Good. Yeah. And sometimes it might feel, for some of those leaders that are coaching, if they're in a culture where that isn't the norm, they might feel a bit like they are, you know, isolated or you know, almost pushing water uphill. But you know, actually, the other way to look at it is that they are, I'm sure, making a positive impact on their teams. They'll be the ones that are, you know, inspiring people, increasing responsibility, improving performance, because it's much more effective to do that in a coaching style. So hopefully the results over time speak for themselves and give that person the sense of progress and satisfaction that comes with being that kind of leader.
Yeah, sure.
That's good conversation, thank you. Any other comments or feedback on kind of this session and what you're thinking around for 2025? Because a lot of this is about, you know, being able to recognize that opportunity for refocus with our teams on development, so that, because that's what helps people to thrive.
Yeah, I think this is coming at a good time for me, Justin, without actually thinking about it. So I've been in role coming up 4 years now, and brought my style and the way that I've done things and got the team used to that and the cadence, etc. And it kind of, I think, maybe time to freshen it up a little bit and maybe use some different frameworks, some different way of approaching it, some antecedents, you know, before we come together and stuff. So I think, yeah, good time to start thinking about, you know, 4 years in now, do you refresh the way you approach it and the tools that you use for it? Just keeps people on the toes, me mainly, if nothing else. No, but keeps me fresh, because it's kind of, I don't really have to prepare too much now. Because I know where we are, what we've spoken about, how the conversation's going to flow, and all that good stuff. So it might be nice to freshen me up a bit. And I think that's to your point about, you know, your business, and that's what keeps you fresh and on it. Yeah, I probably need to freshen up a bit now as well. Yeah,
the changes that, you know, especially in roles like ours, where you are in leadership or you're working with lots of clients and stuff. Actually, that reinvigorating yourself, re-engaging yourself, sometimes you have to almost drive a change for yourself, don't you? Rather than feel like you're having change driven towards you, actually be the driver of change yourself, and that has the effect of re-engaging you. Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So let me share a couple of other things with you before we close today. So I talked about our scorecard. So this is our Coaching Leaders Scorecard. It's a free tool. Let me just grab the link so I can put it in the chat for you. So if anybody would like to take this, yeah, as I say, completely free of charge. You don't need to pay for it. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete it. Let me just put that in the chat. So you should be able to get to that in the chat now. And the idea of the scorecard is that it really does give you just some feedback on your leadership style. So it will present you with a series of assessment statements. You just answer them honestly, and then when you're finished, it'll then send you a report with some scores, and it'll talk about 5 different areas. You can see growth mindset, how you think about growth with your teams, planning and preparation, how prepared and how well you believe you communicate your plans, managing relationships, what are the strengths of the relationships with your teams. And it's not just having good positive relationships, it's about whether or not you feel confident to leverage those relationships and gain commitment from people. Then there is creating clarity. So how clearly are you communicating with your teams, and how well is that communication received? And then the final part is coaching process. How well are you adopting and using a coaching process? It's quite a useful tool. I have a lot of leaders that go through it just as almost like a benchmark for themselves. And then off the back of that, we use what we call our coaching leaders toolkit. You'll see that a couple of the tools that I've run through today's strategic development tool and the continuing professional development plan document are both in there, and I'll send those to you following today's session. But we have this full toolkit of different assets, tools, tables, frameworks that we're able to then use as part of that approach to building out the roadmap for the coach model. And that's been really useful as well. And then I like to think about these 5 things, and you might have heard me say this before if you've been on a call before, but every time I go through my own development cycle, my development process, I sign up to a new program most years. I'm on one at the moment that's quite interesting, and I think about 5 elements of that program. So is it confidential? Can I take my challenges and know that I'm sharing them in confidence with a group that I can trust, and that's important? Is it a community that is supportive, and actually there are people there that are trying to achieve same things as me? Can I collaborate with people and share ideas and learn ideas? Can I get some challenge to the way that I think today? And can I get commitment to act? So commitment to actually do something with what I'm learning. And when you get those 5 components in place, it's taken me quite a few years to figure that out. When you get those 5 components in place, that's when real change happens. And it's something that I run a lot of different programs, whether that's with businesses or open groups. We always make sure that those 5 components are part of that leadership journey. So just a food for thought for you as you think about your next plans. And then I also always like to kind of include my my meeting link. So I've got a link to my calendar, which actually I'm going to just change that link because that's not the current link. That one expired a few months ago, and I had to replace it. So I'm just going to get you the latest link. I thought I'd changed it in the slide, but I didn't press save. So here's if anybody would like to schedule a short catch up, now called Discovery, because I had to change the name of it. Here is the link to the Discovery session. Hold on a sec. Here we go. I'll put that in the chat as well. If you'd like to book a 45-minute discovery session, if you want to talk about your plans for 2025, if there's anything that's going on that you think you would like some help with, or some coaching on, or just a second pair of eyes, then feel free to schedule into my diary, and I'll be very happy to have that conversation with you and see if I can help. Great. Sometimes it can help in a 45-minute session. Sometimes actually you think, yeah, there might be something that we could work on together. Okay, so final couple of thoughts. I love this quote from George Eliot. It's never too late to be who you might have been. I really do enjoy that, and I put a post on LinkedIn recently about people like Ray Kroc, who was the guy that drove McDonald's to its success. He joined McDonald's at 52. And then transformed it into this, mammoth organization. Then you've got people like, Colonel Sanders, who set up KFC, set it up at 65, which always absolutely astounds me. And there's lots of opportunities for us to recognize that it doesn't matter where we are in our careers or where we are in life. If you want to make a change, you want to do something big and bold, actually it's just about setting that goal and really going for it. So hopefully I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you today, because that's the sort of thing that really inspires me as well. Okay, we've got 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to just kind of wrap up and say, if there's any final questions, let's feel free to ask them. If not, I'm happy to kind of give you 10 minutes of your day back if you want to get yourselves prepared for your inevitable 2 o'clock meetings. But if there's any questions, I'll happily stay on. Otherwise, I'll wish you all a wonderful Friday and a fantastic weekend when you get there.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks
All right,
all.
pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, good.
Everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Justin, thank you. All the best.
Thanks, Jonathan. Take care. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Pleasure. Have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you.